Hello, Miss Blanchard here today with a reading and interpretation of Lincoln's first campaign statement from 1832. This was given 28 years before Lincoln was elected president in 1860 and demonstrates to us many of the issues that were being debated on national and local stages in the early 19th century, as well as some personal information about Abraham Lincoln. The era of good feelings had come to a close with a corrupt bargain in 1832. However, Henry Clay and the Whigs were still proponents of national improvements. Jackson had killed national investment in many of these improvements, first through the Maysville Road veto, ending federal funding of national roads. In the national election in 1832, Clay was running against Andrew Jackson, using the Bank of the U.S. as a national issue. Although Clay would ultimately lose the election and eventually witness the dismantling of the Bank of the United States during Jackson's second term, many of the states started picking up the mantle of internal improvements as well as private investors. Lincoln begins his campaign statement by formally declaring himself as a candidate for office and declares his intent to comment on local affairs. In the second paragraph, he goes on to paint a case for endorsing internal improvements in Illinois. You'll see elsewhere on the website that Lincoln is the only president to hold a patent, and that patent was for a buoyancy device to help ships navigate rivers. Lincoln had worked as a young boy on rivers and as a floatman and had experienced becoming stuck on a shoal firsthand. Additionally, he was raised on a farm and knew the importance of navigable rivers to the commercial agriculture of the Midwest. Lincoln is putting forward the typical Whig Party line here in the 1830s, that government investment in internal improvements is necessary. However, he acknowledged that the question of paying for them must be answered. In the next paragraph, Lincoln explains that the construction of the railroads at that point in time would be prohibitively expensive. Remember, this is 1832, and the railroad was just coming to America. On the other hand, canals such as the Erie Canal, funded by the state of New York, which had opened in 1825, had already shown their economic worth. In many states, a canal boom had begun, but Illinois had many navigable rivers already in existence, such as the Sagamo River that Lincoln makes the subject of this speech, and the existing river would make internal improvements much more feasible. In addition, Fulton Steamboat had been covering the Mississippi and other rivers for over 2 decades by this point. In the following paragraph, Lincoln relays his own experience building a float boat and navigating the Sagamo to support his claim that the river presented a viable opportunity to enhance trade and navigation in central Illinois. In the second half of Lincoln's campaign statement, it moves away from the topic of internal improvements and instead focuses on Lincoln's own personal and professional improvements. He stated, "Whether it be true or not, I can say for one that I have no other peculiar ambitions, so great as that of being truly esteemed of my fellow man, by rendering myself worthy of their esteem." Many have taken these words as evidence of Lincoln's indefatigable desire to build his reputation, leading eventually to his ascendancy to the White House. However, the second half of the campaign statement harkens back to the Puritan ideals that had helped to found the northern parts of the country and were undergoing a dramatic shift during the Second Great Awakening in the 1830s. The Second Great Awakening removed the idea of a preordained elect and replaced it with the view that all men were capable of salvation through good works and deeds. Instead of testifying to one's conversion and visible saint status, one's life and actions would be testimony enough. Raised in a Calvinist Baptist upbringing, Lincoln would have understood the ideas of an elect and an individual salvation from an early age in an emotional and religious context, not in the more historical or academic context that modern observers view predestination. This statement and his larger first campaign statement reflect Lincoln's own strict religious upbringing and the rise of the Second Great Awakening. The degree to which Lincoln closely held these religious convictions is debatable, but their larger social impact is clearly demonstrated in Lincoln's self-made man status, as evidenced of his Calvinistic upbringing and belief in self-improvement. Arguing that Lincoln climbed the social ladder, Erica Newmaker uses the story of a 7-foot-long couch to demonstrate that Lincoln was acquiring refined furniture to reflect the status he wanted in society. She notes that in keeping with the spirit of egalitarianism, true gentility could not be affected, but was evidenced from within, and therefore was accessible to everyone. However, the same statement was true of the salvation message preached in Reform-minded and evangelical Protestant churches in the 1830s. The self-made status of Lincoln went hand in hand with the idea of a Protestant work ethic. Newmaker details how Lincoln arrived in Jacksonville, Illinois in 1837, 5 years after his first successful campaign speech, with a rented horse, but unable to afford a $17 room and board. The couch seemed a luxury of a scheming social climber in such context. However, it also reflects Lincoln's self-educated upbringing. Newmaker herself recalls that young Abraham would read between long periods of manual labor on the family farm. Such indulgence in reading was seen as laziness. Lincoln's couch hence became a reflection of his hard upbringing, but also a practical tool for a busy lawyer to take respite on in his law office, much as he had done as a child. Newmaker details how the couch was a symbol of Victorian refinement, but Lincoln's habit of laying down on it was in direct conflict of Victorian decorum. If Lincoln had been a social climber to the degree many accuse him, intent on using significant investment in the sofa as a status symbol when he could not even afford his own lodging, surely he would not deface it by fully reclining, a move so out of custom with those same Victorian sensibilities. Lincoln's love of reading and education is also reflected in Lincoln's campaign speech when he declares support for education as the most important subject which we as a people can engage in. His commitment to free institutions would later make its way into a Republican Party platform as part of the Moral Land Grant Act. At the time, it reflected the extent to which Lincoln valued reading and self-education. His couch was a symbol of such enjoyment and was a personal luxury that a lawyer with a burgeoning law career could afford to entertain. When he addressed education in a speech, Lincoln assured the audience that it would allow people to read the scriptures and other works, both of a religious and moral nature, for themselves. Such personal interaction had been important to the early Puritans, and while not a focus of Lincoln personally, would have played well in the religious climate of the Second Great Awakening. From his education, Lincoln claimed, would flow Puritan values of morality, sobriety, enterprise, and industry. Again, Lincoln returned to this religious upbringing and reflects the religious fervor of the day. Marquis Steiner points specifically to Lincoln's copious involvement in slander cases. In his study, two separate things about Lincoln emerge: a deep concern with community reputation and Lincoln's desire for mediation and compromise among abused parties. While the latter may provide insight into how Lincoln directed some aspects of the Civil War and Reconstruction, the former goes back to the communal values of Lincoln's Calvinist Baptist upbringing. Lincoln took on clients who were defending themselves against both social sins, such as adultery, as well as professional attacks, such as honesty and trustworthiness. Many of the fines imposed seem to be symbolic, and Steiner states that the number of cases that Lincoln settled either before or after trial suggests that slander suits were intended more to restore or repair reputation than to collect damages. Lincoln ended the first quotation we started off with the statement that he only wants others' respect by rendering himself worthy of their esteem. I believe that this is more than false modesty, but rather a statement of Lincoln's concern about his own character and moral righteousness. In sum, Lincoln's first campaign statement demonstrates not only the great themes of the time period, such as internal improvements and the transportation revolution, but also gives us a view inside Lincoln's personal motives and motivations for the personal improvements allowed to Americans in the social and economic upheaval of the early 19th century.